Hey everyone, I just got back home and I watched this video called Ask Yourself versus Nick Fuentes' Buddy on Veganism by Ask Yourself because his content's always controversial and interesting. And I thought it was worth doing commentary on because it has a lot of what makes Ask Yourself a good debater and also a lot of what makes him a very bad debater, where he has no principle of charity and he's going for cheap wins instead of any sort of intellectual rigor. So I'm going to go over that as we go through it. I'm playing this at 1.25 times speed. Usually I go a bit faster, but I hope that doesn't annoy anyone.
So I'm gonna speak to a Nick Fuentes fan. Let's see how this goes.
For a guy who says, I don't really feel any emotions whenever animals are killed because he's like a robot, I really feel like debating makes him smile. He seems very happy.
Yo, what up, Beardson Beardly?
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good, man. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing alright. Just had a big breakfast and feeling pretty good.
Cool, cool. And I guess,
Celebrating the death of Jeffrey Epstein, you know?
I haven't even paid attention to this. Did he actually die, or is that a meme?
Oh no, he's dead, yeah.
So a lot of this beginning is just pointless saying hello and talking about news and stuff. I'll see if I can just skip ahead a little bit.
Which I can't say I took the time to look into in any detail, but it looks like you get some decent views on there, and you have a few thousand subscribers. So seemed like a
Yeah,
worthwhile
we do okay.
conversation. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So you messaged me on Twitter, tweeted me, saying that you
hmm
wanted to basically like put forward a defense for Nick's position on the animal holocaust.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely down with that.
Okay.
Uh
Sorry, go ahead.
no, sorry, I was coughing.
So this person who's on here debating Ask Yourself doesn't really defend someone else's position. He kind of puts forth his own, so you don't really need the context.
It's all good.
No, yeah, I ran across your video because I was looking up some stuff on Nick to do show prep, and I saw that video, and I was like, this guy wants to debate Nick. I'll debate him.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I found that video of his pretty cancerous, so I thought it would be a good opportunity for a debate. Do you want me to open up, or do you want to open up?
You can open up, that's fine.
Anybody who gets asked that question by Ask Yourself should be saying, I want to, because when Ask Yourself gets the opportunity, he will ask one question and drive you forever down the line, never diverging at any point. I doubt he would accept that in any other response, like if the other person asked the question and then only ever ask that question and forced Ask Yourself to always answer that question. I don't think Ask Yourself would accept it, but I mean, if he's going to be fair, then he would have to. But whatever, that's just a side comment. I more want to comment on the content of the video.
Okay, well, I would just ask you a question. So, what is it that's true of animals that,
That
if
if
true
true
of
of
humans, would
humans would
justify
justify a
murdering
global
them for food in
holocaust.
a systemic global
Oh, there it
holocaust?
is. That's the phrasing.
I mean, they don't have souls.
They don't have souls.
Yeah, the animals don't have souls.
Okay, so there's different pathways we could go down here. So, we could talk about how we would treat a being that's analogous to a human that doesn't have a soul and then run a consistency test, or we could just ask you for the proof of souls.
So that as a start from Ask Yourself seems very reasonable. This person has made a claim. Ask Yourself wants to investigate that claim. He's thought of two different ways that he could reasonably investigate the claim, and he lays them out on the table. This part I don't have a problem with. I think this is good.
So I'm thinking I might go with the latter. Like, what's the evidence that there are souls?
The Bible.
Why would I? Why would I take the Bible seriously?
Because it's true. I mean, you can choose to take the Bible or not. I mean, there's also the fact that plants are alive too, and we eat those. You know.
So Ask Yourself. Okay, I'll just let Ask Yourself respond.
I mean,
Well,
what's
let's try to do one at a time though, so we don't get. I don't think you're trying to gish gallop or anything, but just so we don't get like a huge plethora of stuff on the table that we're hopping around in between. Let's just stick to one thing at a time.
So this is one of the things that Ask Yourself does that I actually like. Um, he's very good at focusing the debate on specific propositions and just kind of going through them to make sure they're resolved. So this is not going to be one of my criticisms. This person said that animals don't have souls. He knows they don't have souls because of the Bible, and he knows the Bible is true because the Bible is true. And that's what's been the chain of reasoning coming from this person's perspective. Then he started talking about how plants are alive, but clearly that has no inference structure towards the claim about being the Bible, right? So it definitely seems separate. Ask Yourself is going to keep it separate, and that's a good thing.
With the souls, I asked what the evidence is for souls, right? So, like, the reason to think it's true, you said the Bible. And I asked why that's true, and you just say it's true, right? So, if I'm asking for the reason why it's true, and you just say it's true because it's true, that seems kind of like question begging to me. Do you know what question begging is?
I'm not familiar now. I'm very ignorant on debate tactics.
No, that's fine. So there's different
So he calls it a debate tactic, but it's not a debate tactic. It's just like it's a common type of fallacy. It's a sort of error in reasoning that people often do. And it's not his specific tactic. It's not like Ask Yourself invented question begging.
definitions of begging the question, and we can talk about it and see if this is what you in fact did there. But begging the question is essentially where you assume your conclusion in your premises. So when I ask you why I should trust the Bible, I'm expecting some kind of argument that concludes, therefore we should trust the Bible, believe the Bible's true. Now, if one of the premises is just the claim that we should trust the Bible or the Bible's true, then the conclusion is in the premises, and that's why we would call it like question begging.
I gotcha.
And
Well, I mean,
you'd agree surely that assuming that is what you did, like we can go back over it, maybe it wasn't, but assuming that is what's happening, that's can't be a good argument. We don't
So it seems reasonable the way Ask Yourself is describing it and relating it to this person.
want question begging arguments, surely.
okay. Well, how about the fact that the Bible has been the landmark of every great civilization forever? We could go on that premise.
Okay,
Uh,
well before we move to that, can we just agree that any question begging argument is not a good argument?
yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay,
Whatever.
right. Okay, so then
That's Ask Yourself style of always wanting to get a concession out of people. And he finds this like a very important part of debates. I'm not so much of the same position. I think I can tell when somebody has kind of given up a type of argumentation, or at least when they've seemed to agreed with me that that method isn't it's not a valid form of reasoning. I don't then reiterate that they have to concede on the point. That I feel like is just scoring a little extra points. Um, but we'll move on from there.
the argument is the Bible has been the foundation for good civilizations, therefore the Bible is true.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
like, what do you mean? Like, God's real. Do you not believe in God? Are you an atheist?
yeah, I lack a belief in God. Yeah, so yeah, I'm an atheist. So
I gotcha.
if we say that the Bible, or the Bible's true because the Bible has produced good societies, like I could challenge that claim. Like we could set it up like we could say if the
And what does he do? He puts it into a modus ponens. Absolutely unrequired. It's very obvious what the claim is already.
Bible has produced good societies, then the Bible is true. The Bible has produced good societies, therefore the Bible is true. That would be a valid argument. So I will just, to avoid getting into a tedious discussion about like how different societies were formed and what kind of role the Bible played and all that, let's just grant the premise that the Bible has led to good civilizations. Why should I accept that first premise that if the Bible has produced good civilizations, the Bible is true?
See, now, for me, this isn't the way I would go about it. It's like I have the same disagreement that Ask Yourself does, in that just because the Bible has maybe have created good societies, that wouldn't necessarily make it true. But the way Ask Yourself wants to do it is to throw it back as a question. Um, I would rather just tackle it from why that wouldn't necessarily follow. So I could say something like, let's say the Bible is a very influential book that's not necessarily true, right? But regardless, has good lessons in it and some other good things about it, even from a secular stance, even if the claims about God within it aren't true. You know, they seem to have some sort of at least basic foundations of morals. They might not be up to snuff to today's standards, but, you know, they were good for their time, right? So we could say something like, that would be a reason that they would produce good societies without everything being in it true, right? So I might be able to make a strong argument without saying, okay, you've made this claim, why is it true, right? I would want to go ahead and give reasons to doubt the claim already and see if my opponent could handle those claims. I don't think it's good to just continuously lay out an opponent's argument into some modus ponens and then say, here's the premise I have a problem with. Give me a reason why it's true, right? Now, I could do that infinitely with anyone. I could always say, give me an argument for that. They give me an argument. I say, I doubt this premise. Give me an argument. Well, I doubt that premise. Give me an argument. It's not really an engaging approach. You want to give some content back. And I think Ask Yourself sort of fails to do that.
I mean, what do you mean? You either have faith or you don't. You know what I mean? That's the whole point of religion. Like, it's not whether or not you just have to sit there and prove it to be true. You either have faith in God or you don't.
Right. So I don't. I'm not aware of any reason that seems persuasive to believe in God, right? And right now, to be really clear, if we want to be technical, we're not talking about whether God exists. We're talking about whether the Bible is true. Obviously, if the Bible's true, that's going to entail that God exists. But I'm just looking for the
So that was kind of a pointless comment.
argument that the Bible is true. So the first argument seemed like question begging. You know, it's true because it's true. And the second argument, if we say if the Bible produced good societies, then the Bible's true. The Bible produced good societies, therefore the Bible's true. I'm just granting your second premise, and I'm just asking why I should accept the first premise, that if the Bible produced good societies, the Bible is true.
See, without giving content back the way I was describing it, I think Ask Yourself does these sort of logical syllogism in a way that doesn't really relate to other people who don't sort of think this way. They don't think about things and so they're not really sure what Ask Yourself is asking because they just don't have the disposition to kind of consider it that way. So why I think it's better to be relatable, to try and give the content to your interlocutor the way that they would best accept it and would make a good impression onto what you're trying to get at. And that's something I don't think Ask Yourself does because he has one sort of style.
Well, I mean, this is the whole problem with debating religion and debating this.
So what I would say if somebody says, well, it's sort of a matter of faith, and then I would say, well, to your previous opinion about the Bible creating good societies, do you think like that in order for that to be true, we need to take it on faith? And then would you say that the basis of all the claims that you're saying about the Bible are on faith? Like, can we just point them all towards faith as reasoning? Because if he says yes, then I would say, well, okay, well then what we'll do is we'll disregard your previous comments, right? And we'll say that first, what we need to investigate whether or not faith is a reasonable epistemic way of coming to beliefs, and then we could start the debate there.
Stuff is that you can't prove it. You can't prove that there is no God, and I can't prove that there is. It's just a matter of faith.
My claim isn't that there's no God, though.
But you don't believe in God.
Right. So, okay, so there's one or two things to clear up here. So, first of all, you understand the notion of the burden of proof, right?
Yes, I'm familiar.
Yeah, so the basic idea, and like if these are things that you know well, obviously I don't intend to condescend to you. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. So if this is a basic ass idea and you know it, then that's fine. So obviously, the burden of proof goes to the person who's making the positive claim. Now, you're the one who made the claim that the Bible is true, right? So that's just one thing to be noted. You made the positive claim, you have the burden of proof. Now, the other thing is that you're assuming that I'm making the counterclaim, right? That the Bible is false. Well, I didn't say that. All I'm saying is that I'm not convinced that the Bible is true. So, for example, before we found the Higgs boson, it's not like you had to believe either it exists or it doesn't exist. You could have just been uncertain that it existed. You could have just said there's not sufficient reason to think that it exists. So that's the kind of position I'm taking with respect to God. I'm not saying it's false that God exists. I'm saying I'm not persuaded that it's true that God exists.
One of the things I like here is that ask yourself argued by analogy, and that's probably one of my preferred ways to try and relate content to people, is to give them an analogous situation that tends to have all the relevant characteristics. I think his Higgs boson example was good. I might even steal that because I think that's a good way of relating the burden of proof. So that's good. Ask yourself should stick to these sort of relatable methods of discussion.
Or in this case, that the Bible's true, if that's the claim we're going for.
Okay, but again, like once again, you're asking me to prove something that isn't true. You asked why I thought that animals deserve to be eaten, right? And I think, well, because they don't have souls, and that's my answer.
Right. Well, I didn't quite ask to, if we want to be really clear, I didn't ask why they deserve to be eaten. I asked what's true of them that, if true of humans, would justify murdering them. You said they don't have souls, which I just take to mean if humans didn't have souls, it would be fine to eat them. So then I asked what the evidence is that they have souls. You said the Bible. I asked what the argument is that the Bible's true. We got a question-begging argument. Then the second argument has a premise that I'm challenging. So I don't accept the first premise of that second argument for the truth of the Bible. I don't accept.
See, this is one of the problems that I have with Asif. He loves to summarize all the time, and he summarizes points that are just not really necessary to understand where he's coming from. What Ask Yourself needs to be talking about here is that he just has disagreements with faith as a verifiable epistemic way of coming to beliefs, right? That's Ask Yourself's opinion. I mean, I share the same opinion. I don't think you can just say faith because from faith proves anything you have faith about. It's not really a discriminatory process. Um, and we don't want a process that leads to everything being true. We want a process that actually categorizes things as true and untrue, something faith doesn't give us. But he's not really relating this to the person. All he did was summarize what had occurred, but the summarization doesn't really lead to where Ask Yourself's point is, what he's trying to get at.
That if the Bible has produced good societies, then the Bible's true. I'm just wondering if you can deliver any kind of argument for that, or if this is just where you bottom out and you just say, I don't have an argument. I just believe this for whatever reason.
See, now, the problem is this person thinks faith is a reasonable way to come to a belief, right? So you have, on one side, Ask Yourself thinking faith is not, and the other person thinking that faith is, and they're not engaging in that conversation, or why faith might be good or why faith might be bad. Ask Yourself has positioned it as, you didn't give me an argument. Give me an argument. If you don't give me an argument, you lose. I win this debate, right? That doesn't really frame what you're supposed to be doing in a discussion.
I believe it because I have faith in the Bible.
Right, but when you enter a debate, I mean, am I supposed to have faith because you have faith? Like, we're looking for some kind of reason to actually accept your position, right? If you're just going to say the reason to accept my position is just if you already have faith in my position or something like that, like, that's not very persuasive.
Right. So he's saying it's not very persuasive. That's not. I think that's a very shallow way of answering the question of addressing it. So it's like, let's say I want an argument from someone, right? Like, give me, why do you believe this or why do you believe that? And they get, they kind of go through their thought processes and they start explaining to you how they came to the positions that they hold. And at the end of it, you go, well, that's not persuasive, right? What are you ever supposed to do with that? It's like, I don't know what the conditions of you finding things persuasive is, and we need to have a conversation about that.
I mean, you either have faith or you don't. I mean, I could go into 100 different reasons why we should eat animals. That was just the first one
Right, but
that came to mind.
the first one is just what we're trying to get off the table right now. And the first one, like that, if you really believe one being has souls and the other doesn't, right? That's going to be, you know, it could be, at least on your view, sufficient reason to eat one but not the other. So now I'm targeting that claim about the souls, right? There's another pathway that could have been gone down where I try to run a consistency kind of argument about how you'd treat humans if they didn't have souls, but we've decided not to go down that pathway. I'm just looking for the evidence for.
I mean, there's no we. That's just Ask Yourself decided not to go down that path, and it's irrelevant whether he did or not. Like, the discussion is where it is.
Souls, right? So apparently that's the Bible. The first argument was question begging. The second has a premise that I'm challenging. Now I'm just wondering if you have any,
Like
if you can support that premise.
Do you approach all your debates like a spreadsheet?
Yes, yeah.
That's boring.
Yeah, but it works, right? Some people care a lot about exactitude of thought, and I would be one of those people.
Yeah, but the problem is his exactitude of thought is his particular framing and which question he deems important and all those sorts of things. Now, it's certainly reasonable to keep things within the scope of an overall conversation, right? This is arguments that lead towards not eat or eating animals or not eating animals, depending on whose side you're talking about. So if somebody starts asking questions that are completely outside of that realm, it's reasonable to say, you're just changing the subject. But then to keep it so narrow that we can only talk about the questions that I ask you and only down that path is also unreasonable. There's an acceptable middle ground.
I guess, but you just sound like a robot.
Right, but I mean that's not much of an argument or anything.
No, I'm just making a comment on like your debate style because you're just going through it through this like spreadsheet, like very formulatic. Like
Yeah.
you're asking me to prove to you that like God exists, basically. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not capable of doing that for you. And you keep going on about it.
Right. Well,
I mean, I've already said I can't prove that God's real. I can't prove that the Bible's real. You either have faith or you don't.
See, again, I want Ask Yourself to investigate the concept of faith, the epistemic values of faith, and why he would reject it, right? But he doesn't. He doesn't go through that.
okay. Well, if you're just gonna say, okay, so two things. So, firstly, just a side comment.
Your face is your moneymaker, so why would you pair it with cheap plastic?
Um,
And why does some plastic
About my approach to debate. I just care about being systematic, right? If the goal is a systematic investigation of what's true, then that I think is the right way to approach things.
Remember, being systematic for the sake of being systematic isn't good. Being systematic for the sake of delivering content very well, keeping things very focused, there's a reasonability to being systematic. Now, I think part of what Ask Yourself does is hyper focused and useful, right? It keeps things centered on the topic, and he wants to resolve topics before moving on to other topics. And there's a sense of reasonability when Ask Yourself does this. He's pretty good at making sure that things don't diverge too much. But on the other hand, he's not really addressing what the main disagreements they have is.
I think that um, I don't want to sound rude, so this might be like a slight jab, but it's not meant to be like mean. I think the people who say the kind of things that you just said are the kind of people who just don't have arguments for their position.
So I mean, that's not helpful. That's essentially a fallacy all on its own. So you could say, well, if you hold this one belief, therefore the other things that you'll say aren't of any value. Then, I mean, I can't remember if that's just an ad hom. I think there's a specific name for that, but it's escaping me at the moment. But this person's position on one issue, or this one way that he reasons towards non-veganism, wouldn't exclude any of his other reasons for being any good. And Ask Yourself has just completely dismissed the character of the person rather than the arguments presented. You can dismiss one argument and then not automatically dismiss other ones.
Just don't have any good reason to believe what they believe. Like, of course, you'd complain about someone being formulaic and clear if you don't have a formulaic and clear case. I call it foot soldiering after a vegan YouTuber who's a sophist.
After somebody else I just don't ever listen to because they talk in a way that doesn't fit my brain, which is a way everybody on Earth speaks.
I mean, if you want to really get into points in arguments about this point that you're wanting to make, I could also talk about how we've eaten meat for thousands of years. I mean, it's a part of our bodies. I mean, our bodies crave meat. Like, we need meat.
So essentially what this guy is doing is there's like he hasn't implicitly said it, but I think his position is essentially, look, if the faith position doesn't convince you, then perhaps this other position that I hold will convince you.
To survive.
Right
And
now. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm hoping that by switching the topic, Bearded is implicitly saying, look, I can understand why you wouldn't be convinced by the faith position. Because if faith is either you have it or you don't, and you don't, then there's no reason that it would convince you. And it would be reasonable for Ask Yourself to make sure that's explicit, right? To say, well, okay, so we're going to table the other conversation because you agree that it wouldn't convince me.
You know, everything that you're replacing meat with is just horrible for you.
Yeah, so there are, of course, other arguments that you seem to have here. Like, I can sort of counter that and set it up in the same way, like a syllogism, and just say, what was that claim? We've been doing it for a long time. If we've been eating meat for a long time.
Absolutely unrequired to put things into syllogisms. The point is there, right? Modus ponens is like the least informative syllogism ever. Do you really have a hard time understanding the premises that are implicit within that statement that you actually need to explicitly state them? Nobody needs this.
Then eating meat is morally justified. We've been eating meat for a long time, therefore it's morally justified. I would just grant the second premise, question the first, right? But I don't want to do that because there's this first claim on the table that we're kind of stuck on, right? The first claim is enough to justify carnism.
You're stuck on it. I mean, you're the one that's stuck on it.
Like, yeah, that's where I agree with this Bearded guy. Ask Yourself is stuck on the premise. Like, if they're willing to table it, if Bearded is willing to say, okay, I could understand that you're not convinced by that. So there's other ways. Like, it convinces me, faith seems reasonable to me, but if it doesn't convince you, I understand that, and I'm willing to continue the conversation in a different direction. Perhaps give you some other reasons, right? That sort of offers two different types of conversation. Ask Yourself can say, well, hold on, I don't think that the faith argument should convince you. I don't like that you've accepted your position on the epistemic values of faith. Let's have a conversation about whether or not faith is useful or not. The other way that you can go is just agree to tabling it and then look at the other arguments. These would be the two different ways to sort of continue the debate in a charitable manner. But we're not going to see that out of Ask Yourself.
I told you, I can't prove that souls are real. There's no way I can, but that's what I believe.
Right. Okay. But if you would just grant that you hinge your pro-Holocaust position here on a belief that you can't give any argument for, then we could end the debate there. That would be satisfactory for me.
Well, yeah.
So there's a straw man. This Bearded person obviously thinks that faith is a worthwhile epistemic process, which can generate beliefs, right? So whether or not that is a good method or not, you Ask Yourself hasn't established whether or not he can give arguments for faith. He might say that faith is reasonable, faith is what all, this is mostly what you're going to hear out of theists, is like, everybody has faith. right? And then you start making between distinctions between inductive arguments and faith arguments, those sorts of things, and you can actually draw out distinctions. I mean, I've been down this sort of argument many, many times to know kind of where this conversation goes. But Ask Yourself isn't really interested. He wants to say, oh, you said faith, you lose. That's it, right? I'm not even going to continue the argument. I'm not even going to entertain your arguments for faith. Automatically, by saying that, you've lost the debate. That is not charitable.
Yeah, because you don't want to talk about anything else. That's what it is. Because you know I'm right on everything else. Like you asked me just some like weird fucking question about what quality do animals not have? I mean, they don't have souls. First off,
Mm-hmm.
they don't feel. And no offense, there's a food chain, and they're at the bottom of the food chain. There's so much other stuff we could talk about, but you're really stuck on this fucking souls thing. Even though I've admitted I can't prove that souls are real. I can't do it.
So there you go. So Bearded is saying, I can't prove it, so this claim isn't going to be satisfactory. However, I think that there are multiple arguments of why we should eat meat. Any of them might be sufficient. Like, if any of them are true, then we should eat meat, right?
Right, but the whole thing is, like, look, anyone who's watched my channel for some time is going to know that I have replies to all of the kind of things you're saying about, oh, we've eaten them for a long time, or it's the food chain, or, whatever.
Yeah, but the bearded guy doesn't, like, religiously watch your content, and there's no reason he should give a shit about what you think, how strong you think your arguments are. He should be allowed to attempt to present them in his way, perhaps in a way you haven't heard. More than likely not, right? I mean, I can kind of tell that the guy hasn't really considered veganism question too much, but the principle of charity says allow someone else to present their arguments. I would never say to someone, listen, I've heard the type of arguments you make, therefore you have nothing of value to say, I win, goodbye.
Else it might be, but the whole thing is you've put out a first claim that is sufficient to justify your Carnist position if it's true, right? So if you can't defend that very claim there, and what you fall back on is just saying I have this, like, basically this irrational belief, then at that point that's sufficient for me to just.
So he defines it as irrational. There's no reason Bearded should take it as irrational. He might think that faith is a rational process upon which we need to make epistemic claims, right? So there's that part of it. The other problem with what Ask Yourself is saying is that he's saying it's sufficient. Sufficient does not mean necessary, right? There's a distinction between sufficient and necessary. So while it might be sufficient, so therefore if it was true, we should be able to eat meat, right? Does not mean that he has to use that argument, that it's necessary that this particular argument is true in order to establish his position. So what Bearda could say is, listen, I have multiple arguments. All of them are sufficient. If one of them is true, then it is a sufficient position, right? So let's say I have 5 reasons to do something, and you've knocked away 4, but the one that's remaining is sufficient, then that would be enough to establish his position. What would be like an analogy, right? Like if I should go to the doctors as a conclusion. One is I have this urgent medical need, right? That's one of the reasons. Another one would be, well, it's on the way to the store and I need to pick up some groceries anyways, right? So the second argument might, wouldn't be necessary. The first argument is necessary. That's why I'm going to the doctors, right? So if you knock that out, if you knock out the other one, which might be sufficient, right? Because, well, I'm going to go to the store anyways. Even if I don't have a life-threatening condition, maybe I'd want to check it out anyways, and that gives me a sufficient reason to go out to get this done. That's knocked out. It doesn't knock out every other reason that I have. You've knocked down one peg. So if there's multiple sufficient reasons, then you kind of have to address them all. You can't just declare yourself a victor because you've argued one point off.
Just
It's
like,
not. It's not an irrational belief. It's faith, and maybe your godless, fucking stupid ass doesn't know anything about that because you're too busy injecting yourself with fucking soy.
right, okay.
I mean, that's obviously like a shitty point. But like you can say, you can see that Bearded's thought process is that faith isn't irrational, right? It's perhaps you would think it's a necessary way that we have to come to beliefs. So he would say that, well, if that's all we have, then it's irrational to use the only thing that we have to come to beliefs. And that would spur a different discussion, one that, I'd be very willing to accept and try to debate against. But you could see why ask yourself just telling him it's irrational means nothing to that person.
Let me ask
well,
you. Let me ask you something. Let me ask you something. Do you believe in abortion? Are you pro life, pro life, or pro choice?
wait 1 sec. I don't want to humor that whole.
You don't want to get off. You don't want to get. No, you don't want to get off
Right.
the script. That's
Correct.
what it is.
Yeah,
That's
correct.
What, you don't want to get off the script because
Yep.
you have your little spreadsheet set out for
Mhm.
everything. It's fucking boring. Like, no, just answer the question. Are you pro life or
no,
pro choice?
no, I fully grant that is correct, right? So I do have a specific thing I'm trying to ask. You can call it a script, and I'm sticking to it. So yeah, I'm not humoring the abortion question, although I'm tempted to, but no, I'm not going to do that. So
I don't think it's wrong for ask yourself to not address that question, because there was already a lot on the table worth discussing. So there's no point of just moving it to what is clearly a separate topic. And I wouldn't say that that's like following a script. That's pretty reasonable from that position.
Why not?
we
Why not?
Okay, so the reason is because you've put a claim on the table that's sufficient to justify your position. You don't seem to be able to provide any evidence for it. And if you will simply grant to me, Beardy, if you will just, or Beardly, sorry, I don't know what you like to be called. If you will simply grant that your position against carnism is justified in virtue of some claim that you can't provide any evidence for, then
Absolutely. That's one of my
right.
one
But
of-
that's
definitely
actually
I don't know what he means by evidence, because it's an epistemic claim. Like, you can't go out into the world and take a picture of epistemics or reasons, right? You argue them. You don't. I don't know what he means by evidence in this context, especially since I've heard ask yourself talk about how believing in logic is ultimately unjustified and it's a presupposition you either accept or don't. I'm pretty sure he said that when he was having a conversation with Darth Dawkins. So given that he holds that position, then he would think that he has no evidence for his position either. Although it's very loose how he's using the word evidence here. I would say that Rem's conversation might have changed Ask Yourself's disposition on that, but I'm not really sure. To show that how like logic is just a necessity of the way that we exist. But okay, I just think it's a weird request for him to ask given his own position.
sufficient for me there. So I think I've exposed the position as being silly. So like, if you have
No,
any...
you haven't. You haven't even had a fucking morsel of my argument. You asked me one question.
yeah,
Are you already trying to rage quit on me?
See, yeah, and I agree. Ask Yourself is trying to take a cheap win, take a cheap out. What he should do is, if he's is applying the principle of charity at all, is have a discussion of whether or not faith is a worthwhile epistemic practice, or continue to entertain his other objections if Bearded agrees that the faith argument shouldn't persuade him. Those are the two pretty sensible ways to continue this discussion that Ask Yourself is ducking out of.
Already?
Yeah, so I'm already confident about how this will come across based on that first argument. So what I'd say is, like, if you have a closing statement, you can go ahead and make.
So he cares about how it comes across, but like I've pointed out, there's ways to continue the conversation. There's two reasonable ways to continue this conversation. Ask Yourself is running away from both of them.
It,
I want to know if you believe in abortion or not. That's what I want to know.
The abortion question is not a reasonable way to continue the conversation.
Okay, but I'm telling you, like, let's not be rude.
Why
I'm
are you
not
being
gonna...
a pussy? Well, no, why are you being a pussy about this? Like, you're being a total pussy.
I don't accept
You want to debate? Do you think you would even last 5 seconds
Wait a
with
sec.
Nick like this?
Wait a sec. I don't accept your characterization of me being a pussy for not wanting
You
to
are.
talk. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
you are.
Well, wait a sec, Beardy. Can we at least...
I don't know what the point of Ask Yourself saying is I don't accept his characterization. Obviously he wouldn't. I don't think Bearded's attempt is to get Ask Yourself to agree that he's a pussy.
Give each other time. Regardless of what problems you have with me, you have to admit I let you finish your sentences, I let you talk, right? So,
oh my god.
well,
Yeah,
come
go
on.
ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's only fair, right? So, you claim that I'm a pussy, but I'm just telling you, I don't want to go to that topic because I've already got what I need to consider this debate a victory on the first topic. I don't
And this is where Ask Yourself is just a giant sophist.
want to be I don't want to humor some derail into another dimension about abortion.
You're not even
So-
having an argument. There's no argument here.
Well, yeah, but we've already, Beardy, we've already got the statement from you that your position in support of the animal holocaust is justified in virtue of a claim that you have no argument for. That's sufficient for everyone to think what you're saying here is silly.
No, what you're trying to do is you're
It's not that there's no argument. They haven't had a discussion about faith.
trying to take a fucking gotcha moment, put it on YouTube so you can get a bunch of clicks. That's what it is. You're just being a pussy about it.
Wait,
You don't
wait.
want to have an actual debate. Like, that's the thing. You just want to read your fucking little spreadsheet and try to get a quick little own because, oh, look at this guy. He believes in God.
So I'm trying to be very clear when I talk to you and very honest about what I'm doing. So when you say you have a script, I say, yes, I do, right? When you say all these different things, I tell you honestly if it's what I'm doing. When you say you just want to stick to your topic, I say, yes, that's right, correct? Now, when you say
I never
that,
said you want to stick to
when-
your topic.
when
What
you
I'm
say-
talking about is
what-
very much on topic.
okay, so when you say you want to get your gotcha, that's correct, right? So I think that I've got a gotcha that wins the debate here in most people's eyes. But when
No,
you
it
say
doesn't.
when you say that it's for clicks, though, I would just say that part's not true, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
So
No,
so
I mean, like, you're not interested in having an honest debate at all. You're interested in reading a script at somebody, and then you get one fucking answer out of them that you don't like, and then you're like, oh well, look, he can't prove that God's real. I win.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
not a debate.
Well,
That's not a debate.
wait, but we've already agreed on the statement that your carnist position, right, your position in support of the animal holocaust is justified in virtue of a claim that you can't provide an argument for.
It's not in virtue of. Again, it was necessary, or it was sufficient. It was sufficient argument. You did not establish that it was a necessary argument. So it's not necessarily in virtue of. For something to be in virtue, it would be a necessary argument. And that's something Ask Yourself failed to establish.
So if you think that that's not damning, that's fine. We'll
What
just
kinda-
let the
it's
audience
not.
decide.
Like that,
Yeah, that's fine.
I have
We'll let the
multiple-
audience decide.
I have multiple reasons as to why we should eat animals. That's just one facet of that argument.
Okay. Well, look, Beardy, I mean, I'm done. So do you want...
See, like he's just clearly running away from it. If he established that was a necessary argument, that argument has to be true in order to justify his non-vegan position, then maybe it would be fair to end the debate on it. But he hasn't done that. He's only realized that it's sufficient, but that's not enough to win a debate in any charitable sense. So he is just backing out on a point that he thinks sounds absurd, even though this person obviously doesn't think it's absurd. So it's just going to come down to people who think faith is reasonable and those who isn't. Now that'll probably appease Ask Yourself's audience, but a lot of people have faith. So it's generally a good idea to talk about why faith might be unreasonable.
Yeah, of course you are, because you're a pussy. Like you
Okay.
you won't have an honest debate with somebody. You'll sit there and read a fucking script like a bitch.
Okay, well, Beardy, do you...
Like it's
Look, I'm offering you a close. Do you want the first closing statement or do you want the last word?
I want to know if you believe in abortion or not.
I've told you I'm not engaging you on a separate debate.
Yeah, you're
about
not
abortion.
engaging that because you're a fucking pussy bitch. You won't last 5 seconds with Nick. You'll never ever get to debate Nick ever.
Okay, well, we'll see.
Ever.
Right?
And you'll get fucking stomped if you argue like this.
Yeah,
I'm telling you.
Beardy, you're just emoting at me. I don't really care about
No, I'm
your
telling you the
emotions.
truth.
Right, but I don't care
I'm
about
not
the
emoting
emotions.
anything. I'm telling you the truth. You're acting
Okay.
like a bitch. I
Okay.
mean, I get why you don't like emotions because you fucking read off a fucking script and you don't emote at all.
Well,
Like, you
to
have
be
no
clear,
feelings.
to be
You
clear,
don't debate.
I'm not actually literally reading. I just know my argument well. But
No, you're a fucking spreadsheet, my man. You don't adapt
Yeah.
well. That's why you don't want to go off the script. You can't fucking argue.
okay, well, you can give whatever reasons you like, but either way,
No, it's the fact. Yeah,
for
it's
the
the
for the
fact.
sake of being respectful, right? We're gonna close out. Do you
It doesn't go anywhere more from this. It's just the same shit. Um, and then Ask Yourself mutes him to give his closing statement. Then he unmutes him and says the same thing. So I want to say here that there are good aspects and there are bad aspects about the way Ask Yourself argues. The good aspect is that he can keep the chain of inferences very clear, right? This is true because this is true. That's true because that's true, and make sure that that sort of line is being followed. And I think that's a good thing, so that it doesn't kind of get derailed into the sort of irrelevant things, or just making sure that a particular claim follows through to some sort of conclusion. The problem is that, you know, he's because he's only looking for one sufficient claim that he thinks he's debunked, when really what he just did was not engage with it. He just declared it irrational, then decided that it was necessary and sufficient, and then decided that the debate was over because of that. All of those are just rhetorical tactics. By Ask Yourself, this is why I would consider him a sophist, because he really does extends no principle of charity whatsoever to other people. Um, if he was reasonable, he would have had a discussion about whether or not faith is reasonable, or listen to the other potential reasons, and find out whether or not they were necessary or sufficient, kind of categorize them like that, and then truly understand the person's position. He's not interested in understanding the person's position. Like he said, he is just looking for a gotcha, and then he is just looking to end the conversation on a gotcha. Um, Ask Yourself thinks this is the correct way to debate. I don't think he's ever going to get big doing this kind of style of debating, because people are just going to notice how, you know, uncharitable and what a dick he's being. So yeah, that's the video I wanted to make. I hope you guys take something from it, and I'll see you guys later.